welcome to this third podcast. I think we may talk now a little bit about our expectations about this university and particularly the importance of democratic citizenship debate. I think that nowadays, taking into account the new challenges that the new generations which approach to power in the democratic societies, this question about how to achieve these goals, it's very important. And to be frank, I think that now these generations in current days faces a challenge which is very unusual, I would say, in historical terms, because in the past all conditions were created for the generations to be sort of a pillow by their parents and by the previous generation. Nowadays, the situation is completely different because you are in your own. What are your expectations regarding this debate on that side?
I mean, in my point of view, I mean, the context is quite crucial if we talk about democratic citizenship. I mean, we have, for one side, what you are saying. I mean, we have a whole generation in Europe, especially in the south, with a huge challenge right now, and who is really right now making a lot of questions on how the society works, how our democracy works, and we have the risk of having a lot of generation who doesn't trust in the institutions right now because they feel like they are not taking with their responsibility enough from the politician side. And this is a risky situation that we have to really face. We are seeing how in some countries like Hungary or with the Nordic countries, how some extremists are getting this support from the society with this kind of a speech, which is just the opposite of what we are asking for, which is a democracy with more values, with taking responsibility and equality and respect to each other. And this is something that our institutions should really have to consider right now. What are the challenges and why this is happening? And I think that that should be really taken to the public debate. How we can, as institutions, or how the democracy should make change and open to the citizens. We should stop thinking that citizen is just voting every 4 years or 5 years. We should really make more process as referendums, as other challenge to other bridge to open with the society. And we have a great opportunity with the youth organizations because they are a school for citizenship.
What is curious is that we are all the time discussing, for example, regarding the Arab Spring, the fact that some democratic structures are still in transition or are still not well developed. And at the same time, in Europe nowadays, we realize that what we had for granted in terms of democracy, in terms of capacity for the democratic system to represent the will of the people, is at risk in many areas. And curiously, the template of the European Union, which was supposed to be, let's say, an eternal democracy, a sort of a paradise in terms, we realize, you mentioned the question of Hungary and some other extremists and xenophobic areas, movements in certain countries, which put at risk all this balance, this global balance. And there is, I feel that there is now another situation which it was quite clear during the crisis, taking into account that the answers to the crisis has been made in a different way, with different powers. Let's say countries like Germany, for example, has a clear, huge capacity to influence the global process, which other countries are not. And one of these days, I ask myself if you cannot put at risk the sort of legitimacy of those who elect. For a voter in some countries, we realize that the capacity for influence our our destiny in a more global terms, or at least in regional terms as European Union, can be at risk. And one of these days, people will ask, why do we vote for somebody which has his hands tied, and as soon as he arrives in a more global decision-making process. And there, I think, for the new generations, which are now being forced to migrate once again, which are with their destiny with a huge question mark. I ask myself if, and this is why this kind of debate is important, if there shouldn't be a sort of a, let's say, a generation shock in terms of the empowerment of the youth in terms of their own future, because societies are still ruled by the previous generation. Mm-hmm. But in reality, this previous generation was incapable to create solutions for the new generation. So probably the future is in your hands, and probably we should try to get immediate solutions in order to have you in the center of the debate. That's my feeling. I belong to another generation, so I feel myself a little bit sad by the fact that our generation was incapable to guarantee your future. So I think also that our legitimacy to run the future is being diluted. But I don't feel, to be frank, that the new generation makes the necessary steps to run the show.
I agree, but in some things I think we diverge the ideas. I mean, for once it's true that the democracy was for granted and institutions were for granted in the last generations, and everybody think that it was really solid. But I think the problem that it worked. But there were not channels with the institutions and the society more than voting and some kind of things. But it worked. The democracy worked, and the society didn't have big problems, so everything was okay. But now we don't have this situation. We have a huge problem. So people want to have a voice when the decisions are not taken really in a good way, like I think it's happening right now with the crisis. And this is why the society is asking for channels. And I think the young people right now has a different situation with other generations. First off, the population, in terms of the baby boom generation, it was a really big generation. So they have really the power to change elections. And they have really power to be taken seriously from the political parties, because they were a huge part of the population. Now we have a really small part in the population. If we talk about Europe, I mean, it's getting older and older. So I don't think the political parties are taking seriously our problems more than the pensionists, because they are the huge amount of voters when we talk about elections. But anyway, I really think the young people is prepared and has proposals for this society. The problem is they don't know how to put these proposals into democratic process. I mean, we are seeing that with the Indignados movement, with 15M, with this kind of movements. I mean, it's a lot of huge numbers of young people going to the squares and discuss, and they want to debate, and they want to make even proposals. I mean, they are not just complaining. They have really concrete and good proposals for our process and our
democracy. How to put that institutionally? Because traditionally, I see the case of my country, Portugal. Mm-hmm. The Prime Minister was the leader of a youth organization. Mm-hmm. The current leader of the opposition was also the leader of a youth organization. Mm-hmm. But if you look to their behavior, in reality, they reproduce precisely the model of the parties. The fact that they came from youth institutions didn't change anything in terms of the pattern mm-hmm. of the parties that exist. On the contrary, they just contributed to reproduce the system and creating the idea that a new generation was coming. It is a new generation, but with old solutions. Solutions are exactly the same, and the functioning of the parties didn't change a minimal thing. So, what are the institutional means for having the new generations entering in power through the traditional parties. You mentioned Indignados, you mentioned all the social movements, but sooner or later we need to create some kind of institutionalized way for them to be represented. The old parties, apparently, there are limits for their capacity to renewal. What can be done? What new types of representation could have a real impact in terms of the new generations to be empowered in the decision-making process, which is real important in society?
I think there is two ways. First, we have to put more direct democracy in our institutions, like for example in Switzerland, where you have a lot of referendum, you have a lot of opinions for directly the society can put their voice in the debate. And I think it's something that has to be improved, especially in countries like me and where I come from, it's Spain. We don't have these kind of things, more just referendums when the government wants to make a big question, and we only have 3.
It is more or less the same everywhere in Europe.
But not always. I mean, for example, Switzerland has a
it's a very unique country. We have that in Ireland too. Ireland has a great tradition for referendums, but there are countries in which referendums, for example, are not allowed. In Germany, it's impossible to make a referendum.
That's what
the Constitution doesn't allow that.
I think
but it's difficult because it depends on the national cultures in terms of direct representation, because you have a global problem, but you have a sort of a balkanization of the different countries and different constitutional realities. And it's difficult to change that through a sort of external movement.
That's talking about this formal participation, who has to be improved also for our side as youth organization. We have to be more open and try to approach more people in the debate. And I think, for example, we have good examples in the Youth Council in Spain. We are working a lot with the structured dialogue, for example, and we make open speeches with open discussions, with young people, even people who is not involved in youth organizations. And this is really, really a good way, I think. But also in a global context where the decisions are taken at global level, we have to really be more transparent than how the decisions are taken, and even probably go back to some more regional power in terms of some economical decisions, or some decisions are taken with subjects that we don't know. For example, the Troika, how it works and how the decisions are taken, or sometimes the European Commission.
Don't ask, because if you have the answer, you'll be disappointed.
Exactly, that's the point, and that's something that people is getting disappointed. That's something I think we should have more power. Like, for example, if we talk about Europe and how the economy works, we don't have really an European central bank. And we don't really have these kind of things. I mean, there exists, but it's not really a central bank. So we really have to go back to the sovereignty of democratic institutions, and that's something people is asking. We, for example, in Spain, we have a change of the constitution a few years ago. And it was just decided by the government and the first, and the main political party of the position, and it was not even a referendum or a debate or something about this change of constitution. And everybody know or think that this decision was not even taken by our political parties, was taken by European institutions or even some national governments like Germany. And that's something that people is really frustrated, and that's something that has to be improved.
And do you think that it's a doubt that I have all the time, because these are, I would say, institutional questions to get institutional answers for some kind of a representation. The question is, sometimes this is a debate which is hostage of a certain ideological attitude, let's say. Left or right, can find a sort of common ground that would lead to a certain degree of better representation of youth institutions without necessarily taking the question left or right? Or do you consider that the ideological element takes an important position? Because what I feel sometimes is that the fact that the debate takes a political side immediately divides and we cannot divide the discussion, and we cannot find a common ground and an horizontal approach. In Portugal that happens. Obviously inside the National Council we can find people from different political and ideological backgrounds. But I fear sometimes that the political parties may endanger a little bit the quality of discussion, and particularly may create a sort of a division which will have a negative impact in the capacity for the solutions to be presented as a global solutions and the more consensual solutions. I feel sometimes that the ideological element can have a real impact. I know that there are areas of the political thought that are more open to participation. It's quite clear, it's normal, it's historical, but it's difficult for me to find a common ground, particularly at the European level, which could have a clear impact in terms of the future of the representation of the youth organizations at a more global level, with efficiency, not only with a programmatic or with a doctrinal position.
I mean, it depends, of course. Okay, we will give open this question, I think, for the
other participants. I think it's important that other podcasts can continue this discussion.
Exactly. We will give this opportunity to the next podcast to
we don't want to exhaust all the discussion. That's why we finish now.
We can be really boring. So thank you very much for the nice discussion, and see you in the next podcast, I guess.